I've opened it, so I'll finish it. But it is a milk-based Korean soda that says it's melon flavor.
Melon.
It's exactly as delicious as you would expect. It's got a little lady on it with an umbrella. It's a lot's just going on. But if I grimace,
Gloucestershire house.
Somebody said that they'd heard of this drink and it was like a cream soda, and then Paul, in typical enthusiastic fashion, found a supplier and just bought like a pallet of it. So he didn't just get the one flavor that everyone was like, oh, that sounds kind of nice. He got all the flavors. So we've got all this wacky shit left over. And I don't want to do food waste, so I'm determined.
So is it a cream soda? It is a cream soda. Oh, that makes it sound better than milk. You were like, milk with melon.
Well, yeah. I mean, yeah, my Korean isn't exactly up to scratch, but I have to just go. It says soft drink, milky melon is what it says. So there you go. That's what we're having. Yum.
Yum, yum, yum.
I am so excited about this story today.
Hi, Cara.
Hi, Vicky.
Hi. 3 times a charm. We did it.
Yes.
How are you?
I'm well, thank you. I think I'm a little too excited about today's episode. I'm jumping the gun.
That's brilliant. Well, welcome everyone to She Changed History. Lovely Cara is pumped to give us a story today. So take it away, Cara. Just let's hit the ground running. Let's go.
All right, let's go. So today we will be talking about Mary Two-Axe Earley. And our little intro is as follows. Imagine living in a time and place where marrying from outside of your culture meant expulsion from home and from the company of the people you had always known. Now imagine if this happened not because of the beliefs of your own society, but because of laws foisted onto you by people who had taken control of your land. This was the reality faced by Indigenous women in Canada who married non-Indigenous men after the Indian Act of 1876 was made law by the Canadian government. The system of laws overturned centuries of culture around inheritance and tribal memberships being handed down within families along matrilineal lines. And one woman affected by these laws was Mary Two-Axe Earley. And today we're going to find out what happened to her and how her response changed the world for so many others.
Yeah. You know what? My only Canadian history is Anne of Green Gables. That is it.
Oh, I mean,
I don't have anything else.
That's a pretty great.
Yeah.
Not hugely useful in this specific, but it's just so lush. I mean, yeah.
It's lush.
Did
you watch the Netflix?
I didn't.
Oh, watch the Netflix. It's beautiful.
Oh, okay.
I think
that'll be.
It was really, and they cancelled it, and I was gutted. Yeah, that was one of my pandemic watches. Was that? I'm sure it was out in the pandemic. So
maybe she's just too wholesome for our times. Maybe that's why they cancelled it.
That's true.
All right. So sources for today are not Anne of Green Gables. Sadly, they are the Canadian Encyclopedia, a website called Canadian History A, which is kind of a Canadian joke if we have any Canucks. A blog by Clarissa Peterson called Badass Women. A blog called Feminism is for Everybody. The website of Elections Canada. Oh, and a special thank you for the pronunciation of Iroquois words, which comes from a video which was made public by the Indigenous student ambassadors at Champlain College St. Lambert. Anything I get right is thanks to them. Anything I get wrong is all me. So I will give it a go. Red hot go. Okay. So we begin. Mary Two-Axe Earley is born in 1911 on the Ganewaga Reserve on Montreal's South Shore. She was a Ganya-Gahaga woman. And these are the people that outside of North America, or even within it, we might know as Mohawk. So, like a lot of the women that we talk about, her early life was sort of a mixture. She had this deep family connection, deep sense of community, and she also faced sadness. So when she was very young, she would help her mother to care for sick people in their community. She learned a lot of practical skills at her mother's side. She learned her values about being of service, and she went along with her mom to work with people who were really quite sick until her mother herself tragically died of Spanish flu, which you probably will know claimed so many lives around the world after World War I.
Crazy, isn't it? We were never taught
Yeah,
Spanish flu at school. It was only I found that out on my own kind of just interest. But it too many too many lives to the Spanish flu.
extraordinary. And I only know about it because of the novel Life After Life. They mentioned it, and I was like, wait, what? Oh, so yeah, massive, massive pandemic. And Mary's mother was one of the people who unfortunately died. Mary was only 10 years old at the time. So that's very, very sad. And, for the rest of her childhood, she lived on the reserve and was surrounded by that community, and they kind of were her family. And that was the state until she was 18. And then necessity took her to Brooklyn in America. There were jobs to be had in healthcare because a community of Mohawk people was establishing itself in New York City, filling roles in the building trade as the city grew. So all these skyscrapers going up, massive community, influx of workers. Mary goes along to work in care. And kind of use the skills she'd learned from her mother.
It's like here today, isn't it? I think it's not, to my mind, it's not a low skilled job at all. It's probably the hardest, the highest of skills, really.
It is intense and special work, and it takes a special kind of person, I think, to do it. And so the kind of person we're dealing with here. Right? Sensible, serious, hardworking, skilled. Yeah. That's who we've got. And obviously, it's not just us who think so, because she meets this fella, Edward Earley, who's an Irish American, and they fall in love and they get married. It's gorgeous. They have 2 children, and everything's lovely here, right? Okay.
Nice and rosy.
Nice and rosy, living their lives, working hard, getting on with it. And we are going to put them down there in that happy time for a moment. And we're going to talk a little bit about the history of how Indigenous people like Mary and her mother came to be living on reserves in Canada in the first place. So a little background. In the 1800s, European settlers were increasingly coming into what is now Canada. And of course, they wanted land to farm, they wanted to build towns, but the land was not empty. The Indigenous people had lived there since antiquity. They had their own cultures, their own systems of government. The incoming new Canadian government sort of took a leaf from the book of British colonialism and took the view.
Those British.
Yes.
Everywhere. Well, we get our fingers in everything. We're the most annoying.
It is one of the areas in which Britain was a world leader. And so in this case, the Canadians kind of took the view, as the British often did, that the Indigenous people and their beliefs were obstacles to progress. And coming in and viewing it as ours for the taking. So in the late 1800s and the early 1900s, that government introduced a series of treaties, which was called the numbered treaties. And they were set up as kind of partnerships. So the Indigenous leaders agreed to share the lands of Canada with the settlers in exchange for things like education, healthcare, tools, and crucially, they were promised dedicated areas of land to live on. In Canada, those are known even now as reserves. And if you studied American history or if you watched Yellowstone, you will know in America, those lands are generally known as reservations. So
I did think that when you said reserves earlier, my mind did go to Yellowstone again. So is this assuming that the Indigenous people didn't have education, didn't have healthcare?
Well, so that's a really good question. And it kind of leads on to the other side of this story, which is the game is rigged. So the indigenous leaders, they kind of signed these treaties in good faith. They thought that what they were getting for their people was peace and survival. And I am not in a position to say whether the leaders uniformly believed that the European education and healthcare and so on was superior to what they had already been cracking on with for millennia. My instinct is probably not, but they sort of saw which way the wind was blowing and thought, look, these people are here. We have to find a way to make this work. Let's be pragmatic. What can we do to safeguard our own future as much as possible? And if we get some extra stuff out of it, so much the better, you know? So they were trying to be good leaders, but unfortunately, the government didn't always honor its promises. And
what?
Yeah,
that's a shock.
I know. Governments are like that sometimes, aren't they? So in specific, the lands that were set aside for the reserve were often not particularly desirable, smaller than
so they gave them the crappy land.
Yeah, just like, oh yeah, you guys can now have that bit at the back, which is less fertile.
Crusty layer.
Some of the research suggests that the treaties were sometimes signed under duress, or there was a bit of like bait and switch where one thing would be promised and something else would actually take place. At the same time, the government is using some of these policies, like the education offer, to sort of Europeanize the indigenous population. And that was one, I would say, of the examples of how it was intended to function for it.
Okay.
And furthermore, they were controlling the indigenous community by limiting their abilities to hunt, fish, travel, do all the things that were sort of part of their indigenous culture. And it also just survival activities, being able to sort of feed yourself in the way you always have done changes if you are restricted to only working a certain parcel of land.
It's death by a thousand cuts, isn't it? It's the classic of, I'll just tweak this a little bit, I'll just cut that corner off for you there, and and then suddenly you wake up one morning and the gut of your culture has just been ripped from underneath you.
And before you know, you're in the snare, because you're kind of thinking, I'm not thrilled about this, but I have to be pragmatic and times are changing and I need to get with it and get as much out of it as I can. And so I'm going to go along with this on the understanding that it's the least worst, right? But in actual fact, it was a massive disruption, a massive trauma, and it laid the groundwork for a lot of the challenges that indigenous communities still face now. So I've got a little aside here that in the Iroquois language, Montreal, the major city where Mary Earley lived in Quebec, was known in Iroquois as Jojaga, which translates to where our group broke apart. And I thought, oh, that is heartrending, but it kind of, I don't know, maybe that name predates everything I've just said, but it feels so on the nose for what we're talking about, that it's the breaking open of a way of life. And sort of for all of that, the counterpoint is, as I say, the leaders are trying to be savvy and get what they can out of the situation. They see it perhaps as the least worst option. They also see it as one last place where the First Peoples have got their own community, their own rules. It's a consolidated place where they have rights to property that is enshrined in law.
Okay.
However, in all of these political machinations, it's women who pay the price.
We're thinking about it on such a big scale, aren't we? We're thinking about it in a very binary, all that. And actually underneath that, how many layers of, it's what we were talking about last week with Bell's hooks, isn't it? It's like every layer means something different until you get to either the bottom of the pile, or as in Bell Hook's case, the top of the pile, because she twisted it into an advantage, you know. So
yes, I am so glad you mentioned that. That is exactly the way to think about it, because when you get down to the granularity of individual lives, that's where you see that's the pointy end of these kind of big sweeping policies. And that's where we're going to rejoin Mary Earley, because she, for most of her life, she was just cracking on, just a normal, working, married mom, doing her thing, quiet and unassuming, and just practicing. She was a Catholic. She just was living her life.
Mm-hmm.
But in the 1960s, Mary saw a tragedy that she couldn't ignore, and her kind of quiet and hard-working nature found a new focus.
Sorry, how have we jumped from 1800s? Oh, because she was born. When was she born?
Mary was born in 1911. So the laws that underpin this were ratified in, I want to say it was 1876.
Yeah.
1876. And now it is, she was born in 1911. She got on with it, living her life. We are now zooming all the way up. This is my grandmother's generation, basically. We're zooming all the way up into the middle of the last century. So
that's all right. Last century, dramatic over there.
I read something the last century.
Yeah, that's what people are saying now. Like anything like what's considered old. Oh well, if you were born in the 1900s, okay, mate, all right.
So here we are in the 1900s, right in the middle, 1960, 1966 to be specific. Okay. But yes, we have a quote here.
Quote, in 1966, one of Mary's friends, Florence, died of a heart attack in her arms. Mary believed that being denied property rights on Gagnawaga Reserve that had been a contributing factor in Florence's death. Mary began a series of writing and speaking campaigns to raise awareness of the detrimental impact that the Indian Act had on Indigenous women who lost their status, unquote.
What happened to Florence and to all Native women who married non-Indigenous men at the time was that under the rules of the Indian Act, those women were deemed no longer to be members of their Indigenous community. And that's what is known as losing status. As part of that loss of status, they were stripped of every right that status entailed, including the right to live on the reservation. So those status laws enshrined in the Indian Act affected thousands of women. Early would already have been aware that this was happening. And then it happened to her friend. And she saw in real terms the human cost of those laws. Having seen it happen to Florence and to other women in her community, Mary herself, she had already begun trying to change things. And then in 1969, her own husband died.
Right, got it.
And now suddenly she herself was subject to those same laws. So her grandmother's home on the reserve, which she'd grown up in, inherited, moved back to, she no longer owned under the Indian Act.
Wow.
Just no home
and this is so much to happen in just 3 years as well. Like losing your best friend in 66, losing your husband in 69. Yeah.
So you're bereaved and you're homeless and you no longer have access to the community. Yeah. They did quite a bit of quick thinking. They realized that because Mary's daughter had married an Indigenous man, they could transfer the house into her name, which saved the family from losing the house entirely. Mm-hmm. However, she was lucky to be in that position.
Not everyone had that. Yeah.
Yeah. It was the best option she had, and she was fortunate to have had it. However, she was still stripped of her right to vote on reserve matters, which would impact the future of the community that she loved. She had her daughter not married an Indigenous man. Her grandchildren, any descendants of her daughters, would have lost their rights to their ancestry, property, community, the right to live and work on the land. So for Mary's son, for example, he was shit out of luck. And any children he had, you are no longer part of the community in a legal sense. Again, was not an accidental side effect. That was the intended effect. That taking people out of the community and out of the reserve system and their descendants out of the community and out of the reserve system by kind of snaring the women out like this, if they married outside, allowed the government to winnow away at the indigenous population and the indigenous culture, because it was not going to be passed on anymore by that branch of
yeah. So it's like through the back door almost. It's not a direct hit, is it?
But I mean, it's so nasty for the people who experienced it. And I know from the reading Early in particular, it really hit her hard that she realized she was not going to be allowed to be buried on her family's cemetery plot, because the Catholic cemetery that her family used was on the reservation. And it's
for every part of her life, and even her death.
From that moment forward. And, you know, she herself said, when I married, I was just in love, and I just married this man. And so you don't think, what am I trading off? You think, well, that's ridiculous. Nobody's going to hold that, standard for that just can't. And yet here we are.
And also she probably felt pressured to marry, like, even if she did understand that, unmarried women, I imagine, didn't get a very good reputation in the 60s. Like, there was that societal pressure to at least be married on top of everything else, wasn't there?
Yeah, and she was a Catholic woman, so she
very important.
Probably prioritized having that kind of traditional family. But then with her historical, cultural beliefs and the way that people would hand down legacy along female lines, what a slap in the face to be told, oh no, we're changing that. You can't have things because you married out. It's just
as recently
ridiculous.
as the 60s as well. Like,
as
this is
recently as the 60s, living memory. And
being stripped of those rights. Yeah.
So you're quite right too, that she's facing a lot in her personal life. She's lost her dear friend, she's lost her spouse, she's lost her home, and she's having to go through legal challenges around that attempt by the government to personally control her, get her off the reservation. But she still sees it as a way to try to engage with and change the entire system.
Oh, she doesn't.
She's yes, she does. Yes, she does. Because she is Mary goddamn Two-Axe Earley, and she is not taking this shit laying down. I love it. So she doubles down. She gets busy. She's writing letters. She's giving speeches. She's raising awareness. She's making connections. She reaches out to other First Peoples groups in Canada, because she knows that other women are out there being affected by this, working against this, organizing to overturn the laws. So Mary forms alliances. And in 1974, she and some of the other women founded the Quebec Native Women's Association. So like a focus group, an activist group to really get involved with these matters. And in 1975, she and 60 other women from the community went to the International Women's Year Conference in Mexico City. And I think you're going to like this. I've got another quote for you to read. It's so cool, isn't it? There's an excellent quote about something that I think really highlights her personality and her spark. Would you read that quote?
Yeah. Quote, while at the conference, Two-Axe Earley received a phone call informing her that the Kahnawake Band Council had served the women in attendance at the conference eviction notices. A brilliant strategist, Two-Axe Earley used this event to highlight the racist and gender discrimination she and other women faced in Canada. In light of the negative coverage garnered by this move, the Band Council withdrew their original eviction orders. So, sorry, this happened at the conference.
Yes, she's like a judo master. They attack her, she uses their attack and throws them on the ground. And
amazing.
The media savvy of it. It's amazing to me that she knew, instead of getting overwhelmed and just shutting down, oh God, I have to deal with this, I have to go home, which is what they clearly wanted. She thought, all right then, let's dance. I love it.
you know, even if you would have rehearsed a speech 1,000 times, you'd still be nervous, right? Getting up there and then to be
in front of
thrown a curveball. Yeah,
just the eyes of the world upon you. And
exactly.
it is like the Eminem, you only get one shot. Like
Yeah.
she's going for it, absolutely stepping up and
Oh,
taking that moment. And it just exemplifies the kind of activist that she was. She tirelessly, for 20 years and more, noticed a growing sense of public unease around this
okay.
injustice and kept on asking the government to repeal the parts of the Indian Act that stripped status from women who married non-status men. And she's just at this time gaining the momentum she needs to make that final push. And what's super helpful is that she wasn't reluctant to engage with politics when she had to. So she's
Right.
not a politician and she's not trained for this, but she knew something was wrong and someone had to do something about it. So her approach of just being commonsensical and steady and relentless gained her support. There's this story about in 1983, this big constitutional conference, whatever that may be. I'm picturing like prime minister's question time. I don't know.
Okay.
But she thought, I want to speak about these issues. I would like to have a time slot. And
Yeah.
she was refused. They said, no, no, no.
Classic.
Classic. However, the Premier of Quebec, may we remember his name, René Lemesky,
Beautiful.
yielded his time slot to Mary. He gave her his own time slot. Yes, he did, which I just love. So, allies, this is what the world needs. And she was able then to speak her mind on the public record. And would you read a quote from that speech?
Oh my gosh, yes. Quote, please search your hearts and minds, follow the dictates of your conscience, set my sisters free. Oh, I wonder how long that slot was as well, because I imagine it's only like 3 minutes.
It would have been moments. You're right. And
so she needed to hit that bullseye and not miss.
And I don't know. I mean, this is just my personal reflection here and that. But what is extraordinary to me is that after everything she's seen, she still sees the decency and the potential for cooperation.
Yeah, she's doing it through the right channels, right?
She's doing it through incredibly generous channels. She's not saying, I'm squaring up to you. She's saying, your heart has it in it to see that this is wrong. Your conscience knows this is wrong. And you know what? It only bloomin' worked because in 1985, after all of her many, many, many decades, that work paid off. And the bill that she had been championing, which was called Bill C-31, received royal assent. So through that bill, the Indian Act was amended to restore status rights to women and children who had had their status removed under the past law. And it also set as law that in future, women would not be stripped of status based on who they married.
Great. So it's backdated and it was going forward. Yeah.
Exactly. And that meant that on the day that it passed, Bill C-31 restored status to 16,000 women and 46,000 descendants. So who knows how many millions of people will have benefited between 1985 and now. And Mary's own reserve, for example, was able to restore access to over 2,000 women and their descendants. That was just her reserve. She herself was one of them. And in fact, she was the first person whose status was reinstated by the Minister for Indian Affairs, as was. And could you read the words he said and then her response, which is below?
I could find no greater tribute to your long years of work than to let history record that you are the first person to have their rights restored under the new legislation. Mary had this to say in reply. Now I'll have legal rights again. After all these years, I'll legally be entitled to live on the reserve, to own property, die, and be buried with my own people. She's very gracious.
And a gentle soul.
Yeah, I think so.
MTAE had lots of public recognition alongside with the restoration of the rights that should have been hers in the first place. Shall I whiz you through a list of her big gongs that she received?
Yes, let's go.
So in 1979, she was given the Governor General's Persons Case Award. In 1981, yeah, sounds good. 1981, she got an honorary doctorate of law from York University in Canada. Doctorate. Excellent.
Yeah.
In 1985, she was inducted as an officer of the Order of Quebec. In 1990, she, along with 2 other First Nations activist women, received the Robert S. Litvick Award from McGill University to recognize their contributions to the defense of the rule of law and the protection of the individual against arbitrary power. I love that they
they're heavy words. Yeah.
1996, Two-Axe Earley was given the Inspire Award, which is a national Aboriginal Achievement Award. And that was specifically to recognize her efforts in making Bill C-31 happen.
Okay.
And in addition to all of that, a documentary called I Am Indian Again tells the story of her life. And its title was taken from a moving quote from Early, talking about how it felt to have her identity stolen away and then reclaimed. And the director is a woman called Courtney Montour, who herself is a Mohawk from Ganagawa, just like Mary. So she's part of the same community. And
gorgeous.
When Mary Two-Axe Earley sadly died in 1996 at the grand age of 84, it was thanks to the work that she herself had done and the changes that she herself had brought that she was able to be buried as she wished in the Catholic cemetery at the Ganagawa Reserve. So the lasting legacy then of Mary Two-Axe Earley's work resonated in her own life, but also is the restored rightful status and rights and properties of so many women and their descendants. And I'm glad you mentioned bell hooks earlier, because that's the other piece here, that her work lives on in the understanding it brought to the wider Canadian feminist movement and Canadians in general about the kind of specific challenges that being an Indigenous woman brought. And it's that intersectional thinking that you talked about in that episode. And I think bell hooks would really have approved of Mary Earley. And the fact that she clearly saw that whilst these challenges were happening to her, they also brought her unique opportunities.
We need to put them together at our dinner party.
Oh, yes, please. I'd love to see it. So I'm going to end with a bit of cheese, and I can't help myself, but here we go. So the name of the community that Mary grew up within is the Ganyangahaga, which translates roughly to the people of the flint. And I think Mary Earley, in her persistence and strength and her determination, lives up to that name. She's a woman of flint.
Yes, Cara, absolutely. Yeah. Why was she called Two-Axe? Is that her name? Like literally
that was her family name. So like my surname is Gardner. Her maiden name is Two-Axe.
She wielded at someone.
I'm not really sure how. I don't know enough about Mohawk culture to understand where
that just shows my lack of understanding of that culture, doesn't it?
Here we are, babe. The system is functioning as intended. Our educations did not encompass this. So there's a reason we don't know this stuff, and that we have to go out and do this research and find out cool shit about amazing people.
Oh my God, she's so cool. And the picture of her as well. I know it's just her face, but I can totally see her with her handbag on this stage.
The vibe, the fashion, and that iron fist in a velvet glove.
Yeah.
I am so kind and gentle, but do not cross me. I love that photo of her so much.
It's like the Nans off the Shreddies advert for people who can't see the photo. We know they were badass in the Shreddies factory. And, Mary is the same. Be more Mary. Be more Mary.
Yes.
Thank you for listening to this episode of She Changed History. If you enjoyed it, please like, subscribe, and comment below. Find us on our socials, Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube. If you've got any ideas of women you'd like us to cover in a future episode, please comment on the socials or email us at shechangedhistory@gmail.com.